Have you ever stumbled upon something seemingly harmless, only to uncover a mystery far greater than you could have ever imagined? An abandoned suitcase in the middle of a crowded airport, a canine detection dog reacting strangely, and an old letter filled with cryptic messages. Oliver Henry never thought that an ordinary day at the airport could completely turn his life upside down. The suitcase didn't contain a bomb or anything dangerous. It held the missing pieces of a story he never expected to unravel. The mystery of his father, who vanished 20 years ago. But why now? Who left this clue behind? And most importantly, could the man Oliver believed to be dead still be alive? If you love stories about family bonds, the loyalty of canine dogs, and the pursuit of hidden truths, don't forget to subscribe to Dog Stories today. We truly appreciate every bit of your support. Now, join Oliver and his loyal companion Duke on a journey to uncover a truth buried for years. Seattle-Tacoma International Airport was bustling and noisy on this cold November morning. Streams of travelers hurriedly pulled their suitcases, weaving through the endless flow of flights. Announcements echoed throughout the vast terminal, blending with the murmurs of passengers and hurried phone calls. Amid this controlled chaos, Oliver Henry, a seasoned airport security officer, was on duty alongside his loyal partner, Duke, a German Shepherd K9 with a flawless track record of detecting what others couldn't see. Oliver adjusted his thick coat as the chilly air seeped through the massive glass walls of the airport. He glanced at Duke, who walked with a professional, alert demeanor, his ears perked up, always on guard. Airport security checks might seem routine, but Oliver knew that a single moment of distraction could lead to serious consequences. As they passed Gate C10, Duke suddenly stopped. His ears twitched slightly, his nose flared as he took a deep breath, and his sharp eyes scanned the surroundings. Oliver immediately sensed something was off. In all their years working together, Duke had never reacted this way without a reason. "What is it, buddy?" Oliver murmured, tightening his grip on the leash as Duke began to pull him toward a nearby bench. There, a lone blue suitcase sat abandoned. No one around seemed to claim ownership, and that immediately put Oliver on high alert. Duke stepped closer, sniffing around the suitcase, then froze in place, his body rigid, tail standing straight. A low growl rumbled from his throat, a signal Oliver couldn't ignore. "Possible suspicious item," Oliver reported through his radio, keeping his voice calm but firm. "Potential hazardous object at Gate C10, requesting immediate lockdown of the area." Within a minute, the area around Gate C10 was evacuated. Security personnel swiftly established a perimeter, directing passengers to move further away. The chatter and commotion gradually faded, replaced by an uneasy silence, broken only by the occasional airport announcements over the PA system. The bomb squad arrived, fully equipped, moving with absolute precision and caution. Oliver took a step back but kept his eyes locked on Duke. The dog never looked away from the suitcase, his breaths coming in quick, measured intervals, as if sensing something beyond human perception. A technician maneuvered a robotic arm toward the suitcase, performing the initial inspection. The entire area held its breath as the mechanical claws slowly unzipped the bag. No wires, no ticking mechanism, no explosives. Instead, at the center of the suitcase lay an old wooden box, carefully placed. The tension in the air eased slightly, but Oliver's instincts told him something still wasn't right. One of the bomb squad officers cautiously lifted the box and set it down on the ground. Slowly, he pried open the lid. A bright inspection light illuminated the contents, and what they saw made everyone freeze in place. Inside was a stack of old letters, bound together with a faded red ribbon. The paper had yellowed with age, carrying the weight of time. Beside it, a small, well-worn teddy bear rested, its fur matted from years of use, one ear slightly torn. But what truly caught Oliver's attention was a small card attached to the bear. He bent down, carefully picking it up. The handwritten words on the card were delicate but firm. "For Sophia, with love, Dad." A chill ran down Oliver's spine. An abandoned suitcase, left in the middle of a crowded airport, not containing explosives or anything dangerous, but instead old letters and a child's toy. Yet this only made everything feel even more mysterious. Duke, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, sat beside Oliver, his deep brown eyes fixed on the wooden box as if he, too, knew this was no ordinary discovery. Oliver took a deep breath, his gaze locked onto the inscription on the card. Who was Sophia, and who had left this suitcase behind? Questions began stacking in his mind, pulling him into a mystery he never saw coming. Oliver Henry sat in the small TSA conference room, the fluorescent lights above emitting a faint, steady hum. In front of him, the old wooden box from the blue suitcase rested neatly on the table, along with a stack of letters bound by a faded red ribbon worn by time. Beside him, Duke lay still, yet his eyes remained locked on the box, as if he too was waiting for an answer. Oliver took a deep breath, his calloused fingers brushing over the rough texture of the aged paper before carefully untying the ribbon. The letters were neatly arranged, each one bearing delicate yet firm handwriting, clearly written with care and deep emotion. His eyes skimmed the first few lines. "My dearest Sophia, I am sorry for everything. If I could turn back time, I would never have left you. Please know that no matter where I am, you are always loved. Please forgive me." Oliver froze, his eyes stopping at the signature at the bottom. His heart skipped a beat as he read the name. Noah Joseph. This couldn't be a coincidence. A cold chill spread through Oliver's body. That name, his father's name, the man who disappeared from his life when he was just 8 years old. If these letters truly belonged to Noah, it could only mean one thing. His father had lived a secret life, a life that included another child, a daughter Oliver had never known existed. He flipped through the remaining letters, scanning each one. The words carried the same tone of regret, written like a father desperately trying to reach out to the daughter he had never been able to be with. Sophia, that name echoed in his mind. Old memories resurface. The image of a small house in Redridge, Wyoming suddenly flooded Oliver's mind. He could still see himself as a child, sitting by the window, waiting for his father to come home. But the nights passed in silence, and his mother's quiet sorrow became his only answer. His father had left without a word. Growing up, he had only ever heard one version of the story. His father abandoned them. But now, staring at these letters, Oliver couldn't help but wonder, had Noah truly walked away from them? Or had something else happened? He swallowed hard, feeling his fingers tighten around the letter. If Sophia was truly Noah's daughter, that meant he had a sister he had never known existed. So why had his father kept it a secret? Oliver set the letter down and turned to the wooden box. Beneath the stack of letters lay an old photograph. His hands trembled slightly as he picked it up and turned it over. A young girl, about 5 years old, with golden blonde hair and striking blue eyes, sat on the shoulders of a man Oliver recognized instantly. Noah Joseph. Though his father's hair had started graying in the picture, there was no mistaking that face. Turning the photo over, Oliver's chest tightened as he read the handwritten note on the back. Sophia, Yellowstone National Park, 2007. Yellowstone National Park. Where was that? And why was this picture here? Questions without answers. Oliver sat in silence, his mind racing. Who had left that suitcase behind? Why at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport? If Noah Joseph was truly the father of both him and Sophia, why had he never known about her? And most importantly, was Sophia still alive? Oliver narrowed his eyes, his chest tightening with unspoken questions. There was only one way to find out. He had to follow his father's trail, and Yellowstone National Park was where it began. Oliver Henry sat in the security monitoring room at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, his eyes locked onto the screen as he carefully analyzed each frame. The surveillance footage from Gate C-10 earlier that morning played in front of him, the timestamp showing precisely 9:45 a.m. A man in a worn-out jacket and a low-pulled baseball cap appeared in the corner of the screen. He walked with a slight limp, blending in among the thousands of passengers passing through the terminal each day. But one thing was clear. He wasn't in a hurry. Oliver furrowed his brows, gripping the mouse tighter as he slowed down the video. The man set the blue suitcase down beside a bench, pausing for a moment as if waiting for someone to notice it. Then, after just a few seconds, he turned away and disappeared into the bustling crowd. A knot tightened in Oliver's stomach. Could it be? He rewound the footage, freezing it at the exact moment when the man's face tilted slightly toward the camera. The image was grainy, unclear, but something about the contours of his face felt unmistakably familiar. A strange sensation coursed through Oliver's chest, his heartbeat quickening. Noah Joseph? His father had vanished from his life nearly 20 years ago. Could this really be him? Oliver leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath. If this really was his father, why had he shown up here? His eyes drifted over the old letters again, stopping on an envelope that looked even older than the rest. The edges were frayed, and on the back an address was faintly visible: Redridge, Wyoming. Without hesitation, Oliver searched for information about the address. The house no longer existed, but property records indicated that its former owner had ties to a rental account in Redridge. He dug deeper. Soon, he found something that made his breath hitch: an active utility account under the name Noah Joseph. The most recent bill had been sent to an address in Redridge, Wyoming. Oliver raised an eyebrow. His father was still alive, and more importantly, he had left the suitcase on purpose. Duke senses something. As Oliver processed the revelation, Duke, his loyal canine partner, suddenly stood up, ears perked, eyes locked onto the screen as if he had just sensed something. "Duke, you see something?" Oliver asked quietly. The dog let out a low growl, a reaction Oliver had learned to never ignore. Over the years, he had come to trust Duke's instincts without question. If the dog was reacting like this, it meant the suitcase and the man who left it were no coincidence. Oliver reached down and gently ran his fingers over Duke's head. "Then we have to find him." The journey to Redridge, Wyoming. Oliver didn't waste any time. He quickly wrapped up his work, filed a report citing a potential security threat, and then prepared to leave. With Duke by his side, he set out for Wyoming, toward the answers he had been missing for 20 years. Duke sat attentively in the back seat, his sharp eyes glowing with vigilance as the car rolled down the highway. After hours of driving through desolate roads, Oliver finally reached Redridge by late afternoon. It was a small, quiet town, with dirt roads and scattered wooden houses that looked like they had stood there for decades. He pulled up in front of a modest house, the same one listed in Noah Joseph's rental records. Though small, there were signs of life: an old pickup truck parked outside, and a slightly open living room window. The first step toward the truth, Oliver cautiously climbed the wooden steps and rang the doorbell. His heart pounded. A few seconds later, the door creaked open, revealing an older woman with sharp, observant eyes. She seemed wary at first, but when her gaze met Oliver's, something in them softened slightly. "You're Helen Foster, right?" Oliver asked, recalling the name from the rental records. The woman gave a slow nod. "Who are you?" Oliver hesitated briefly before pulling a photograph from his pocket. The picture of Sophia and Noah Joseph at Yellowstone National Park. Helen's eyes landed on the photo, and her face instantly paled. "My God," she whispered, her eyes widening in shock. "You're Noah's son?" A chill ran down Oliver's spine. "So, you knew him?" he asked, his voice controlled but heavy with anticipation. Helen's grip tightened on the doorframe. But instead of shutting the door, she let out a slow sigh and pulled it open wider. "Come in," she said softly. "I think it's time you knew the truth." Oliver glanced down at Duke, who simply sat still, as if he too understood that this door would lead them to the answers they had been searching for. As Oliver stepped into the small house, he couldn't shake the overwhelming thoughts racing through his mind. The suitcase, the letters, the photograph, and now this woman. Everything was leading him toward a mystery far bigger than he had ever imagined. But who had actually left the suitcase behind? And more importantly, did he truly want to know the whole truth? Helen Foster stared at Oliver Henry, a flicker of recognition and disbelief in her eyes as he placed the photograph on the table. Her fingers trembled as they brushed over the worn surface of the aged paper. "You're here because of your father, aren't you?" Her voice was low, but firm. Oliver nodded, carefully watching her reaction. Helen didn't seem shocked by his presence, but there was something deeper in her gaze, something unspoken. "You knew I was coming, didn't you?" he asked. Helen let out a slow sigh, pouring herself a cup of tea before sliding one toward him. "Noah used to talk about you," she said slowly. "But I never thought this day would come so soon." Oliver clenched his hands into fists. "If he talked about me," he said, his voice tight, "then why didn't he ever come back?" Helen was silent for a long moment before finally looking up. "Because he couldn't." Noah Joseph was running. Oliver sat up straight, his sharp eyes locking onto Helen's. "He couldn't? What do you mean?" Helen hesitated, as if weighing how much she should say. Then her voice dropped to a whisper, like she was afraid someone might overhear. "Noah didn't just leave. He was running." Oliver frowned. "Running from what?" Helen set her teacup down, her gaze distant. "Do you know who your father used to work for?" Oliver shook his head. "All I know is that he left when I was 8 and never came back." She took a deep breath. "Noah worked for a government organization, a mission I still don't fully understand. But I know one thing for sure. He saw something he wasn't supposed to see. And from that moment on, he was never the same. Oliver's jaw tightened. What could be so dangerous that it made him abandon his own family? Helen's eyes filled with quiet sorrow. Noah never shared the details, but I know this. Someone wanted him gone. He was always being watched. Always looking over his shoulder. He couldn't come back, Oliver. He left to protect you and your mother. Oliver clenched his fists. For the first time in his life, he wondered if everything his mother had told him was really the whole truth. The truth about Sophia Duke let out a soft whimper, sensing the tension in the room. Oliver gently ran his hand down the dog's back, trying to steady himself. If he left to protect me, then what about Sophia? Helen hesitated before sighing. Noah tried to start over, but he never truly escaped his past. He kept tabs on you, watched from a distance. He knew you joined the military. He knew you became TSA. He saw you grow up, but he couldn't let you know. A surge of emotions welled up in Oliver's chest. Then why leave the suitcase? Why now? Helen gave a small, knowing smile. Maybe he finally decided you were ready for the truth. Oliver sat in silence for a long moment. Do you know where he is? Helen stood, walked over to an old drawer, and rummaged through it before pulling out a small, folded piece of paper. She placed it on the table in front of him. This is the last known address I have for him. Oliver looked down, his heartbeat thudding in his ears. Yellowstone National Park. Oliver looked up at Helen. Why would he leave me clues? If he's still running, shouldn't he be staying as far away from me as possible? Helen Foster met his gaze, her expression unwavering. Maybe. He's running out of time. Oliver's chest tightened. Running out of time? Duke whimpered softly at his feet, as if sensing the weight of the moment. Oliver took a deep breath, his eyes locked onto the address on the piece of paper. No matter what the truth was, he knew he couldn't stop now. An emotional encounter. Oliver Henry pulled up in front of a small bookstore nestled along the main street of Red Ridge, Wyoming. The faded sign above the door read, Foster's Books, and the large front window reflected the warm hues of the setting sun. He stared at the entrance, an unsettling sense of anticipation creeping into his chest. Duke remained still in the back seat, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. He tilted his head slightly, as if picking up on Oliver's unease. Taking a steadying breath, Oliver stepped out of the car and walked through the glass door. A small bell chimed, announcing his presence. Behind the checkout counter, a young woman with loosely tied blonde hair was arranging books on a shelf. She wore a light blue sweater, her expression calm, yet there was a quiet depth in her eyes. Oliver felt his chest tighten. He didn't need to ask. He already knew. This was Sophia Marie. She turned upon hearing the bell, flashing a polite smile. Hi, can I help you find something? Oliver cleared his throat, suddenly finding it harder to speak than he had expected. I'm not here for a book. He paused, locking eyes with her. I'm here to see you. Sophia's smile faltered, her brows knitting in slight confusion. See me? She shook her head, her posture shifting subtly into caution. Do I know you? Oliver swallowed hard. Reaching into his coat pocket, he pulled out the old photograph of Sophia and Noah Joseph at Yellowstone National Park and placed it on the counter. She glanced down at it, then picked it up. In just a few seconds, the color drained from her face. Where did you get this? Her voice trembled. Oliver took a deep breath. Because the man in that picture is my father, too. The truth shatters. Sophia clutched the photograph tightly, her wide eyes filled with shock. What did you just say? I'm Oliver Henry, he said slowly, and my father is Noah Joseph. The room fell into complete silence. Sophia staggered back as if she had just been punched in the gut. No way, she whispered, her hands trembling. Oliver gave a small nod. I didn't know about you either, not until I found the suitcase at the airport. He pointed to the photograph. Inside there were letters from our father, to you, but it wasn't just some forgotten luggage. Someone wanted me to find it. Sophia stared at him, her breaths coming in sharp, uneven gasps. My father never mentioned you. Never. A sharp pain twisted in Oliver's chest. I always thought he abandoned me too, but now I'm not so sure. Sophia clenched her fists, tears welling up in her eyes. He was the best man I've ever known. He took care of me, loved me, and now you're telling me he had another family? Her voice cracked, heavy with emotion. Oliver didn't blame her. This was a truth too big, too painful to accept all at once. A terrifying truth. Is their father still alive? Sophia lowered her head, her fingers gripping the photograph like a lifeline. After a long pause, she whispered, Where did you find the suitcase? Seattle Airport, Oliver answered. It was left near Gate C10 just minutes before I passed by. Sophia's eyes flickered. Gate C10? She repeated the words, her mind clearly piecing something together. Oliver sat down across from the checkout counter. Sophia, I don't think that suitcase was left behind by accident. I believe our father, or someone connected to him, wanted me to find the truth. Sophia remained silent for a long moment before letting out a shaky breath. You think he's still alive? Oliver held her gaze. I don't know, but one thing is certain. If he disappeared to protect us, then now he's trying to send us a message. Sophia placed a hand over her mouth, as if trying to hold back the overwhelming emotions flooding through her. She had spent her entire life believing that her father was just a normal man, a man who had loved and cared for her unconditionally. But now, everything she knew was unraveling. Oliver reached into his pocket and pulled out the small note Helen Foster had given him. Helen said this was the last place he was seen. He set it down on the counter. Yellowstone National Park. Sophia stared at the note, her expression still clouded with confusion. Yellowstone? Oliver nodded. If we want answers, that's where we have to go. Sophia glanced down at the photograph still clutched in her hands, then back up at him. The fear in her blue eyes hadn't faded, but now there was also a spark of determination. All right, she said, taking a deep breath. Let's go find him. Duke wagged his tail, as if he too could sense that the real journey was only just beginning. Oliver Henry and Sophia Marie set out from Redridge, Wyoming, heading toward Yellowstone National Park. The western sky was beginning to fade into shades of ashen gray as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Duke sat calmly in the back seat, his watchful eyes tracking the passing scenery through the car window. Sophia clutched the old photograph in her hands, occasionally glancing down at her younger self perched on Noah Joseph's shoulders, as if searching for an answer hidden somewhere in the past. Mystic Lake, Sophia murmured. That was my father's favorite place. I remember he used to talk about it when I was little. Oliver glanced over at her. Then that's where we'll start. They both knew this trip wasn't just about finding a missing man. It was about uncovering a truth neither of them had ever been prepared to face. The road to Mystic Lake. The path to Mystic Lake wasn't easy. As they ventured deeper into the national park, their cell signals faded, leaving behind only winding dirt trails and the whisper of wind weaving through dense pine forests. After nearly 2 hours of driving, they reached a trailhead and parked. From there, they would have to continue on foot. Oliver adjusted his backpack and checked his flashlight, while Sophia pulled her coat tighter around her body, bracing against the creeping chill in the air. Duke led the way, sniffing at the crisp night air. He moved cautiously but with a sense of purpose, as if he somehow knew they were approaching something important. As they neared the edge of the lake, the moonlight cast a pale shimmer across the still water. The entire scene was eerily serene, yet Oliver couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was lurking in the air. The first sign. Sophia suddenly stopped. Look over there. Not far from the lake's edge, a large rock jutted out of the earth, its surface etched with faint, weathered markings. Oliver stepped closer, his pulse quickening as he realized this wasn't a natural formation. Kneeling down, he brushed away a thin layer of dirt and dust from the stone's surface. That's when he saw it. A small, folded piece of paper wedged inside a narrow crevice. Sophia held her breath as Oliver carefully pulled it free. The paper was aged, its edges yellowed with time, but the handwritten message remained startlingly clear. Keep going. I'm waiting. Sophia's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God. Oliver clenched the note in his fist, a chill running down his spine. Noah Joseph had left this behind on purpose. He wanted them to find him. Oliver turned to Sophia. Are you absolutely sure your father never stayed in contact with anyone? Sophia shook her head, struggling to process what she was seeing. I thought so. But if he truly wanted to disappear, why leave clues? Duke let out a low growl, stepping closer to Oliver and sniffing around the rock, his body tense, as if he had sensed something more. Oliver crouched down, carefully examining the note. The paper was old, but not completely weathered. It had been here for a while, but not long enough to be destroyed by time. Maybe your father was here recently, Oliver said, or he knew someone would come looking. Sophia crossed her arms tightly over her chest. If he really wanted to meet us, then why not just show up? Her question lingered in the air, and Oliver had no immediate answer. He stood, scanning the surroundings. A cold wind rustled through the trees, whispering through the leaves as the darkness of the forest deepened around them. The night was still, yet the tension in the air grew with each passing second. Noah Joseph hadn't just disappeared. He was hiding for a much bigger reason. Oliver turned back to Sophia. Maybe he's not just running, maybe he's trying to protect someone. Sophia shivered slightly. Protect who? Oliver narrowed his eyes, looking ahead, where the trail disappeared into the shadows. If Noah was still alive, what exactly was he running from? Just then, Duke let out a low, guttural growl. Oliver froze, his breath caught in his throat, eyes locked on the darkness beyond the trees. They were no longer alone. The moment of truth, Duke stepped forward, ears perked, nose twitching as he sniffed the air. The tension in the forest was thick, like an invisible fog pressing in on them. Oliver and Sophia moved cautiously along the narrow trail, their flashlights cutting through the dense foliage. Just a few steps ahead, a weathered old cabin stood alone in the clearing, its rusted tin roof barely holding together under the weight of time. Sophia clenched her fists, anxiety tightening in her chest. Oliver glanced at her, giving her a small nod before slowly advancing toward the door. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. If this was where Noah Joseph had been hiding, then they were about to face the answers they had been searching for all along. Oliver lifted his hand and knocked firmly against the rotting wooden door. Silence. Then, faint footsteps from inside. A long, slow creak filled the air as the door opened. Standing in the dim light was an older man, his silver hair unkempt, his tired eyes sharp and calculating. Sophia held her breath, gripping the photograph tightly in her hand. Noah Joseph. For a long moment, none of them moved. They only stood there staring at one another, the weight of 20 lost years pressing down on them. Noah looked older than Oliver remembered, but his eyes still held the same unshaken resolve. A wave of anger surged through Oliver's chest. 20 years. 20 years of silence. 20 years without a single explanation. So, Oliver said, his voice cold, you're actually alive. Noah's gaze shifted between Oliver and Sophia, his expression filled with both sorrow and regret. I knew you'd come. Sophia stepped forward, her voice trembling. Why? Why did you leave us? Noah took a deep breath, his eyes dark with pain. I didn't have a choice. Oliver clenched his teeth, his hands forming into tight fists. So you abandoned my mother and me, just because you had no choice? Noah shook his head. No, Oliver. I left to protect you. Sophia frowned. Protect us from what? Noah stared at them for a moment before lowering his voice. There are people who wanted me silenced. If I didn't disappear, I knew they wouldn't stop until they came for you. Who? Oliver demanded. Who are they? Noah shook his head again, his eyes filled with caution and fear. If I tell you, you'll be in danger. Sophia took a step back, feeling the weight of betrayal crushing her. You lied to us. My whole life has been a lie. Noah closed his eyes, his shoulders heavy with the burden of the past. I never wanted this, but I couldn't come back. Oliver felt a storm of emotions raging inside him. He had spent his entire life resenting this man, yet now, standing before him, a part of him couldn't fully hate him. So what now? Oliver asked, his voice low and steady. Noah looked at them, and in his worn, weary eyes, Oliver saw something he had never seen before. Fear. The confrontation wasn't over. A cold wind swept through the cabin, carrying with it a heavy, tense silence. Sophia shook her head, her voice trembling. We came all this way to find you, and you still can't give us an answer? Noah looked down, then whispered, because if I tell you the truth, you will never be able to return to your old lives. Oliver and Sophia exchanged glances, their hearts pounding in their chests. Noah was afraid, not just for himself, but for something much bigger, and this story was far from over. Noah Joseph sat on an old wooden chair, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the window, where the dense forest swallowed the night. Oliver and Sophia stood before him, their minds racing through the revelations they had just heard. The truth had finally come to light. Noah hadn't abandoned his family out of selfishness or irresponsibility. Years ago, he had witnessed something he was never meant to see, a murder tied to a powerful underground organization. When he tried to expose the truth, the people behind it hunted him down, forcing him to leave everything behind to protect the ones he loved. They killed a man right in front of me, Noah said, his voice hoarse with the weight of old memories. And when I tried to report it, I realized that the people I thought I could trust were the ones pulling the strings. Sophia clenched her fists, her emotions a storm of confusion and anger. So you've been running? Your whole life? Noah slowly nodded. I had no other choice. Oliver took a deep breath. And what about now? Are they still after you? Noah let out a dry, weary chuckle. Maybe, but I'm tired of running. The small cabin fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the wind whistling through the cracks in the door. Oliver and Sophia looked at each other, knowing they were standing on the edge of a life-altering decision. If they took Noah with them, they would be stepping directly into danger. But if they left him behind, they would be condemning him to a life of endless running, just as he had been for the past 20 years. Sophia wiped away her tears, her voice trembling but resolute. I can't leave you here alone, Dad. Oliver glanced down at Duke, his loyal canine partner who had been by his side through everything. Duke didn't need to say a word. Oliver understood. Loyalty isn't something that can be measured. It simply exists. He looked back at Noah. The anger was still there. The pain still lingered. But so did something else. A bond long broken had begun to mend. Oliver nodded firmly. We'll find a way to get you out of here. Noah looked at them, his eyes filled with raw emotion. I don't deserve this. Sophia smiled softly, her tears still glistening. Family isn't perfect, but love is forever. For the first time in decades, the three of them sat together, not as strangers, but as family. Duke wagged his tail, his eyes reflecting the warm glow of the small fire. Maybe from the very beginning he had sensed what this journey was truly about, not just finding a missing man, but reconnecting the bonds that had been lost. Do you believe that family is always a place to return to, no matter the pain and misunderstandings? Oliver, Sophia, and Noah's story isn't just about secrets and revelations. It's about loyalty, forgiveness, and the true meaning of family. If you love heartwarming stories about family, the unwavering loyalty of dogs, and the pursuit of hidden truths, subscribe to Dog Stories today. Have you ever felt like someone kept a big secret from you? Tell us in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts.